mental wellness, and we have our district health and mental wellness guru, Reverend Dr. Rick Armstrong is with us. He runs our MAP program where pastors and family and church workers can call and receive counseling, and it's one of the benefits that's provided by our district for the folks that are part of our district. And so, Rick, I want to thank you. You know, mental health is a huge thing, and especially during this time of COVID, it's a huge thing, and it's something that we have to make sure that we are talking about and that we're aware of, and especially in the ministry. You know, studies indicate that pastors suffer a high degree of depression. There's a high degree of burnout. There's a high degree of people leaving the ministry. And if you give me just a minute, I want to share a little bit of my personal story. About 15 years ago, I was a church planter, and I developed what they called then clinical depression. Now they're calling it, what are they calling it now, Rick?
We still call it clinical depression. So, yeah.
Well, my doctor was using another name for it. But anyhow, so I
severe dysthymia.
What's that?
Severe dysthymia.
No, okay, there you go. I like clinical depression better than.
I do too, yeah.
But so I've always been a glasses half full kind of a person, out on the mission field trying to plant a new church, trying to serve God, and I found myself in this deep pit of despair, and I didn't even realize I was depressed. I was just run down. I was tired all the time. I was fatigued, had physical pain in my body that I didn't understand. And we were going to visit my mom after Christmas, as was our tradition, and she lived about 3 hours away. And I was driving with my young family in our Suburban or Ford Expedition, driving down the interstate, and the thought came to my mind that if I got this truck up around 90 or 100 miles an hour and drove us into an abutment, I could take us all to be with Jesus. And it was almost a rational thought. You know, it was like that would solve everything, and it scared me to death. And so when we got to my mom's, I started looking up some of my symptoms and found out that you know, it appeared I had depression. Went to the doctor, got on medication, got into a behavioral program to change some of my behaviors and understand it, and climbed out with God's grace and with the help of professionals, climbed out of that pit of despair, and have not gone back into that pit, you know, since. But depression is a very serious thing. Depression messes with your mind and makes you think that things that are irrational are actually rational. And if you're a pastor or a lay person and you're suffering with depression, or you know somebody who's suffering with depression, this is a very, very serious thing, and it's also a very treatable thing. And so I just want to encourage everybody to pay attention to this. It's not a sign of weakness to have depression. I used to think it was. And going through this was a gift to me, because God really grew my compassion and my understanding of how hurt and broken we are as sinful people through my own depression. It removed my own self-sufficiency. And so I just want to encourage anybody that's watching this, talk to a professional if you feel there's any inkling to it. There's no reason to suffer. There's a lot of help that's available. So that's my introduction. And I guess I'm going to hand it off to Jason. And Jason, you can run with Rick.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing your story there. And, you know, I think, praise God, you had the awareness to go do something about it, and not just hold on to that feeling or that thought.
I had the awareness to do something about it after I thought that I would go and take my whole family to be with Jesus. So that was that was a little scary, man. But yeah, thank God that He brought me through that.
If I could jump in there too. First of all, President Johnson, I can't say enough about your transparency and your leadership in that. You make it real important for people to understand that fact of depression, anxiety that plagues a lot of us. But one of the things studies also tell us about church workers who have a lot of that going on is we like to do the old term of suck it up and pretend it's not there and just make believe to everybody else in the world and think that that's going to take care of it. But that really makes it worse, because the reality is we often believe that those kind of things are the matter of the will, or I don't have enough spiritual faith. The reality, most of severe depression, like 99% of it, is a chemical imbalance. It has nothing to do with the will. And it would be like telling a diabetic that if you just had more will and more faith, then you wouldn't have to take that insulin. It's a physiological problem, and that's why they did medication. So I really affirm you in sharing that out there, and the leadership to do that and to dismiss that myth that's out there about all of this. So thank you.
Yeah, I really think that the one thing you said that's actually really powerful is talking about, to talk about this or to go to someone, and kind of goes with what you said, Rick, is a sign of weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And it really, I think it's a sign of just the opposite, a sign of strength. Mm-hmm. To take proaction and to take a step and say, hey, something's not all right. And it takes courage to say, okay, I'm not all right, and I'm going to go talk to someone and connect with someone who can help me or sort through this. And I think it's really important that we talk about this, because not only it's like suck it up, but it's suck it up in isolation. Mm-hmm. And I think my biggest concern has been ministry. Ministry is very lonely anyway. And then you add COVID on it. And I think we just multiplied the isolation there. And so that kind of led me to just, to say this is, there's probably a lot more going on in us than we're aware of, because of what we're dealing with all the time. Like you said, Rick, the stresses of ministry, and then you add COVID on it. Can you kind of talk about like how that is a multiplier? Maybe that's probably, what do you see how that's affecting church workers? And when we have a stressed environment, then we add COVID and, riots, other things going on in our culture that put stress on us in the church.
Well, I guess I like to put it in terms of, or I don't know, I believe we have to see it in terms of, we are in a transitional time. And in fact, I think in many ways we are in multiple transitional times right now. Can I throw some slides up on the screen that maybe can help with this?
That'd be great. I appreciate it. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah. Host disabled attendees in screen sharing. Can I share a screen?
You should be. You're one of the hosts.
It's giving me a pop-up that says I can't. I'll try one more time and then I'll just talk it. Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Oops, I don't want you to see my emails. Thank you very much. Where did I go?
I see we have not been here before slide.
You see that slide?
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, good. I want to frame this under that I think that there is a piece of us that as we go through these times that we lose the emphasis that Romans 15 has. May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with joy. And that's not a superfluous piece. There really is a reality of the goal that God has in mind for us as we go through the difficult times of life. As I think of transitions, I think many of you in the Southern District or in other areas that may be watching this, think of that. I think of the times and disasters, the times following hurricanes. I have heard many, many times from people here in Florida as we deal with this that they've said to me that, Rick, it feels like another hurricane, but I'm not. They say to me, first of all, I don't see the cone out there anywhere. And they also say, I'm not sure if it's coming or if the storm is already hit and we're recovering. And so as you see in that line of the emotional ebb and flow, that it is transitions that we go through are times from the ending of way things were that lead us eventually to a new normal and new beginning. when I think of COVID, when I think of the transition we're in, I'm a sports guy. And so for me, all of this started the day the NBA shut down. And I know it started a few days before that. But since then, in my opinion, we have been in this wilderness, and transitions are something we experience a lot of times in our lives. I sit here as a person who, while I'm sitting here recovering or dealing with the midst of a COVID, and my wife and I being locked down, and me doing all of my counseling virtually, I'm also in the midst of a transition in that I retired. I retired a year ago. I flunked retirement. I'm still seeing clients 2 to 3 days a week, but I'm in this transition of what those other 4 days of the week are like, and how you do that, and how you get used to, you move from what was to what will be. And you notice, as I put up there on the screen, there's an ending, and then there is a new normal out there somewhere. But one author calls it the period of confusion and distress in between. I like to think of it in spiritual terms as the wilderness wandering. I think in terms of those days as the people left Egypt, and as the 40 years they wandered until they got to Jericho. I hope and pray, folks, that this COVID situation doesn't last 40 years, but I know it's already felt like it's been that long.
Yeah, I think that's a point I wanted, just before you move on too quick. I really want to underline that. I think that's, when I thought about us talking today, and you were talking about your semi-retirement transition, I was thinking, well, that I know from talking with people, that transition can be difficult. You better have a plan, and you've talked about your plan, about how you were transitioning, how you were shifting responsibilities. You had things, this was anticipated. I mean, you had some timelines set. You had coordinated, communicate with other people. There was goals in mind. And I thought, even when you had a well laid out transition, and maybe we've had that in ministry, you're laying out something, you're like, quote unquote, feeling control of it and change. But now we're talking about a transition here where there's not control. It's not planned out. And there's no, an our point, deadlines or really ends of, like you just said, kind of like, where is this going to end? And the new normal, well, that's really hard to see a lot too. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's created a higher impact, wouldn't you say, in this time?
Oh yeah, but I would say to you, Jason, that and I shared with you all those wonderful plans of what I had in mind and how I was going to do retirement and how that was going to look. But then the reality is, as you well know, as I started into my retirement in the month of June, my father got seriously ill. Mm-hmm. And so it was about my wife or I or my sister traveling back and forth to Houston, daily being on the phone with doctors and nurses and other people and family members, and trying to take care of him. And in the process, then in November, he died. And so then was the taking care of the estate. And then my wife in December had surgery on her shoulder, and that changed the look of my retirement. And then in March, COVID came. And so all of those wonderful plans that I had, and I came to understand that when God says, I'm working with you, Armstrong, in your transition, I don't control that stuff. Yeah. And I think that that's the big piece of transitions that we struggle with. Yeah. We struggle with the fact that that so much of this is out of our control. But the reality is, I really think we have to come to a reality understanding. So much of our lives is not in our control. And this is just a more intensification of that. And the biggest piece that I think that we have to understand that goes on in transitional times is, as I have there on the screen, it's anxiety. Yeah. President Johnson was talking about depression. I've come to experience in my practice that most of the time, well, all the time most of the time now we see that conditions that people have there's at least 2, if not 3 issues going on. And often it is about anxiety and depression. And I think that sometimes in treatment of that, I hear people focusing on the depression, but in reality, often what I see with my clients is that it was anxiety first that led to depression. because depression is really a piece. Some people describe depression as anger turned inward. And so when I'm so anxious that so many things are out of my control that I can't do, it becomes this spiraling effect of what I cannot do more than what I'm able to do. And so
Can you say it one more time? That seems really.
I think we get into the place that there is more of what I cannot do, I cannot control, than there is a reality of what I can control. And that's what causes the spiral in that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love the way. I was just going to ask you to define anxiety a little bit more. And so
well, anxiety is that place. Well, and I want to say that most of the time whenever we talk about anxiety, I think we put it in a negative connotation. But anxiety in reality is a warning system that we have within us. When I get anxious about something, instead of me seeing it as, oh crap, there's my anxiety again, I could say, oh, I'm anxious. I wonder what's going on that's causing that. I wonder why I'm feeling that. It really is a warning system that we've been given in that way. And I'm going to talk about the brain in a minute, and that's going to share some of that. And so what we do often in our anxiety, we have a choice that we can either respond or we can react. And I think that most of the time what we find ourselves doing is reacting, because there's just a limited thing that we see that we can do, or we are treading new ground and we're just so overly anxious about that we don't spend the time thinking it through, praying about it, finding direction. We just feel this compulsion that I've got to do something. And so I'm going to react. And it often comes out of a place that is encumbered with a number of other expectations or a number of other burdens that are going on in our lives. And so that's what I say in the next piece is, so anxiety and how we respond to these transition times is not just about what's going on outside. We've got to spend the time on what's going on inside of ourselves, because it's what's going on inside of ourselves that then produces our actions or our lack of actions. And so for anxiety, I may be feeling like I'm unable to perform. I may be feeling like I'm stupid right now and I can't figure this out. I may be feeling like I'm failing my whole congregation because I can't do all of the adjustments to all the videos and make them look nice and clean like church down the street is doing. And so there's a lot of stuff that can be going on inside of us that then causes us to react. And often what we do is react, even though we don't tell anybody, we react toward ourselves first, in self-deprecation, in self-diminishment, in not in grabbing onto guilt and grabbing onto shame and all of those things, which do not empower us at all. Go ahead.
I'm going to try to translate this into what I've been told too, and this has just been really good to hear this path out of you, is because I think it's a slippery slope what I'm hearing, and but I've always kind of heard depression is when you have too high expectations for yourself, and the gap between your high expectations reality is too big,
which creates
that anxiety. And then I love that. I never heard that anger inward. So that would be like almost part of the sense of grief, in a sense, your anger at the fact you're not having this, and that you, and then you take that next step and you turn it inward so much.
Well, and understand too, as you're saying that, maybe to amplify what you're saying too, Jason, is the reality of often the depression that people go through is not a hereditary chemical imbalance.
Okay.
But there are times in which our anxiety gets so strong, and as we understand it, our bodies are holistic systems, that it causes some of the malformations of the neurons firing and all of those things, where then the chemicals aren't being produced as they need to, because that anxiety that's going on within us has changed some of the chemical makeup, is the theory that's out there. And that's how powerful it is. Does that make sense?
Oh, it makes great sense. I love the way you laid it out.
One of the things that surprised me the most about depression was that it often came out in anger.
Wow.
I felt angry. I acted angry, and that wasn't my normal, state. And so it's a very true thing. And then the anger turned inward. Absolutely. That's
Well,
huge.
and I think sometimes what we find too is that the anger turned inward operates first, finds itself there first, and then there is this projection piece that goes on because I'm angry at myself because I don't like this stuff about myself because I feel bad about this stuff. Then you must feel bad about me too, and you must be mad about me too, and so now I'm mad at you. Where people will say, whoa, 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 I never thought that way about you.
Yeah.
But because we feel that way about ourselves, we think others feel that way about us. And then that just intensifies that loop.
When I was stuck in the depression, I wasn't able to be self-aware enough to say, this anger that I was feeling is coming from these other things. I was just stuck in this anger, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why I felt the way I did. I actually prayed to God with tears many times. Lord, lift this thing from me. I don't know why this is. And it wasn't until I had that event that scared the bejesus out of me of thinking about taking my family to be with Jesus that I went and got help and then worked through and discovered what those things were. So, getting help and talking to somebody who knows what they're talking about is massive. That's huge.
So, Rick, are you just going to piggyback on Eric's experience? So when we have this unchecked anger, that's what motivates us into bad habits, behaviors, thoughts, moves us in that direction because we're just trying to silence that voice maybe or that feeling?
Well, anger can be a predominant one in there. I usually try to talk to people about the four major feeling words: mad, sad, glad, and scared. And so mad is the anger. Sad, sometimes our sadness, sometimes our anxiety can be wrapped around a deep sadness as well, or a deep scared as well. But what we often see is that those multiply and anger becomes even coincided with those things as well. And so it's the emotions that run in there. If I could for a minute to tie into that whole thing of the brain, the upstairs brain and downstairs brain.
Yeah.
If you see down here at the bottom, two major pieces of the brain is the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of the brain, small part of the brain that kind of controls our involuntary pieces, the things that we don't have to worry about, that we want to make sure is working, like our lungs and our heart and the blinking of our eyes. It's the amygdala that controls those things and makes them happen. But it's also the amygdala where when there is danger, it's in the amygdala where the hormones are first released there in order to counteract danger in our lives. And so when there is danger and when there is anxiety, that usually it finds itself starting there in the amygdala. But then the other portion of our brain is the prefrontal cortex, and that's where we do our thinking. That's where we do our creativity. And so this staff person here superimposed, if you can see that, superimposed a two-story house on top of the brain. And the phrase that we often use with folks is that in those times of anxiety, in those times in the midst of transition, in those times when we feel out of control, when we feel burnout, when we feel worthlessness, we get trapped running around. And I think you used those words a while ago, President Johnson. In our burnout, we just start running around downstairs over and over, trying to fix, trying to solve, trying to change our anxiety. And it's just that reactive piece that goes on and on and on. And why I say to folks that it's important to slow down, it's important to take a look at what's happening inside. It's important to I think prayer, meditation are a great means to do that, so that we can slow that reactive running around down enough to go up the stairs into the prefrontal cortex, where we can do this logically, where we can be creative and figure out solutions and what we can control.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's the neurological struggle that sometimes goes on within ourselves in these times of transition. And we do this piece in the schools that we work in. We have kids create a calm down jar, and they put water. They take a regular water bottle that you use and fill it with water and some cooking oil, and then put some glitter in it or some other things. And they basically make what we used to call the old snow globe. And so that whenever they are anxious, that we encourage them to grab that calm down jar, shake it up, and see all of that stuff that's going on. And that's your brain right now, as all of that stuff is shaken. And we encourage them just to watch that and let it calm down. And once they've calmed down, it's enough for them to then move on into being more logical and more directive in the things that they're doing.
Well, there you go. That's a convention gift for the pastors meeting, church workers gathering. We should have snow globes, and when we get that anxious, shake it. Well, I think that's an incredible, great illustration, because I know in my own life, and I can think I was thinking of conversations I've been having where people are stuck in the basement or the lower level, and emotionally cannot get upstairs yet.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they're just moving around. One lady came to my mind whenever she had a conversation, she felt anxiety, she would clean. Mm-hmm. She had to clean. You could talk to her, but she had to clean. She had to keep moving. She had to keep moving furniture around and clean and dust and of our church. But she'd like, come over and talk to me. I'm really stressed out. She's shaking, but she would walk around and clean and talk to her. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Well, and there's sometimes we can do some of those things that become coping skills.
Uh-huh.
So if my mind is running and my anxiety is running on this stuff at the church that I can't solve, or these people at the church that are on my case of how we're opening or closing worship or whatever, if I shift that and go do something else. I've told the story for many years that all the time I was in the parish, every one of my churches had people that owned lawn mowing businesses, and they would always offer to come and mow my yard. And I would always tell them, no, because that's the one thing I got to do every week that I could begin and end and step back and see it completed.
Yep.
And so I think sometimes as we shift our tasks, as we shift what we do, we then can move ourselves into a place where we can become more creative and more cognitive about what we do in that way. So
great.
So anxiety is a big piece in this time. And what I would say again, we want to often focus on out there. What are they saying? What needs to happen? What are they upset about? But first of all, what we have to do is we have to, as leaders, I think it's important for us to stop and focus on where am I? What's my anxiety about? What can I do about that? Where am I headed? What do I believe about what needs to be the next steps? So that our ministry is more intentional and more, I think it's even what we sometimes say, we open up for the ability for God to lead us at that time, instead of the whims and the waves of whatever the popular thing is. So yeah.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of a great quote I heard, and it's been in my head since I heard it. But if you can't lead yourself, you shouldn't have the privilege of leading others. Mm-hmm. And I know it's in a negative context, but it was kind of like, where are you in this? And make sure that you have taken care of yourself. You're not still shooken up by stuff. Mm-hmm.
Well, and the way I usually say that, Jason, is leaders, make sure you take care of your own anxiety first.
Yeah.
So that as you respond, you're responding out of a sense of where you believe you're being led, rather than responding out of a sense of, I just need to make those people happy so that I won't feel anxiety anymore. And so it shifts, where's the ownership, and it shifts who's the one that should be leading as we take the time to hear from God and being led in that way. Yeah.
Hey Rick.
Yes, sir.
That's good.
A lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now is kind of first article stuff. It's how we are wired, how our world works. Can you plug this in for us a little bit into second article and third article into faith in Christ and the work of the Holy Spirit? Or am I being premature?
I'm going to get there. I'm going to get there, yeah. First of all, I want to put this up there. There's some pieces of self-care. There's some pieces of how we care for each other, which includes that intentional meditation, spiritual time. But let me jump up here just because you asked that, and I like you. I ran across devotion last week or something, I think it was, and it was Matthew 13, and it was the whole story of the weeds and the wheat. And what struck me in that is, the owner says, after he's planted all this wonderful wheat, and then the enemy comes and puts the weeds in there, and then his servants are saying later, after the weeds and wheat have grown together, you want us to go pull out the weeds, and at this point, and his words were, no, in gathering the weeds, you root up the wheat and let them both grow together until the harvest. It struck me, and that's what the devotional writer said, is that we want this world perfect and everything right so that we feel better. But right and perfect for us in the Church of God is what Christ has given to us. And that we will always be his wheat that lives in the middle of weeds. And weeds will always be part of this world. And sometimes it's the weeds and the situations from the weeds that in our weakness then point us to the strength of Christ in our lives. Because they inform us on our inadequacies, and they inform us, the weeds sometimes inform us where we've allowed our focus to move to. But that wheat, that place that we live in as children of God, redeemed and saved by the cross and the empty tomb, always says to us that that's who we are, and that's how we live, and that's the people that we are. And so it's real important in that, I feel, and I think there's another piece here. This slide right here, being and doing. I think it's really important for us as children of God to understand that what I do is not what saves me, and what I do is not where my strength and my value comes from. It's who I am as a child of God who's been redeemed by the cross and the empty tomb. And I think that often I hear in the work that I do with church workers, in groups, in therapy, in workshops, I still hear a lot of, I'm doing this stuff to claim my value. I'm doing this stuff to make me feel better. And I think it's so important to understand my value is already there because of Christ and because of God's love for me. I do it in response to that, which I know is second article and bleeds into third article too. But so does that hit where you are? And my definition of resiliency, that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay because I'm safe in my relationship with God through faith in Christ Jesus. That's a piece of assurance that I have as I wander in the wilderness and as I go through those times right now. So yeah.
So resiliency is an inside job, but it's God's job in us.
That's right.
Of his grace and his word. Mm-hmm. And really just resting in it.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's the piece that when we go upstairs, I hope that when we go upstairs in our brains, that mm-hmm. the heart of our faith that lodges in there is reminding us that you are a child of God no matter what happens here. You are loved by the God of the universe. You are redeemed by his son. And it's real clear that that's what's there for you, even though situations around you or people around you may be saying otherwise. Mm-hmm. What God says about us is so much more important. No. I also believe that speaks a lot to, and I think that sometimes as things go on here, get back up there. there is just a lot of grief that is, I think that's the other pieces of transition that are going on in our culture today. There's a lot of grief that is happening. The whole transition process is a process of grief. But obviously the hundreds of thousands of people who have died is just a huge amount of grief that is going on in the lives of people today, in our world and in our communities. And I hear over and over the claims of healthcare workers and others that just really encouraging us not to see those folks as numbers, but to see them as people. And I think that is so important. And there, I think there's even an unspoken grief that sometimes happens for many because of the fears that we have, those who have pre-existing conditions, and they live in a lot of fear right now, and a fear that really brings them to this place of grief in so many ways. And it's important for us in those times to validate our feelings, to be able to speak that. I also believe, and I wrote a blog a few weeks ago, that while we were dealing with this, this whole COVID illness and health crisis, another long-standing disease descended upon us, in the disease of hatred and racism, and that also has a lot of foundations, not just in anger, but a lot of foundations in grief as well, because of people, how they have been diminished, and of people about even situations of loss that has taken place, and loss of future and loss of possibilities and those kind of things. And so there's a lot of grief and mourning in those situations. So I think one of the pieces that has kind of amplified a lot of this in our times is there's just these multiple transitional kind of stuff that's going on right now. And if you take it back to a hurricane, a community disaster, you know, what we could always do, and what we always did with hurricane victims and everything, is we would try to find them a place of respite where they can get out of town and go somewhere else. But the difficulty in this one, where can we go? I mean, it's
Right.
worldwide. And so we continue to be there, and we have to find our places to go inside of us and within our family context and within our church context. And I've often said throughout this time that in many groups and all that I lead, that I am just so proud of the church. I'm proud of the church that we didn't stand on our rights to worship. We stood on the value that Jesus taught us to love. And that's what we did, is we loved our community. And then we went to new means to get worship out there, and to get Jesus out there to people who weren't going to come into the rooms because of their fear. And so I think it's been a beautiful time for us in that way.
So you really painted us how we get into this, what's going on, and maybe we've gotten some self-awareness as we're just listening to this, going, yeah, I've got those feelings, I got those different thoughts, or yeah, I mean, the grief, I can really relate to that. I know my people are going through tons of grief. I think maybe a little biased, but I think the older generation, because they're losing more in a sense. You know, I hear it in my phone calls with different ones, and just so how do we? I mean, what would be your guidance on us to say, hey, you know, here's some things we can do to help not just ourselves and help others. And we obviously talked about silence and the downstairs not reacting, how to respond, but what are some other things we could do to help out for those that are going through this grief?
I want to tag on to something, then I'll answer that.
Okay.
Oh, what was that? 4 or 5 weeks ago, something like that. Well, kind of as all of this was starting, my wife has her parents were chain smokers and did that in the house. And so she's got some lung issues and all that, not real bad, but anytime she gets a cold, usually it goes in pretty quickly into bronchitis or pneumonia or whatever. And so I had in my mind, as all this started, you know, I needed to be careful where I went and what I did, and we did together in order to, I need to do that for her and protect her in that way. And we were talking about that one evening, and my wife's a nurse, you need to understand that. And she said, well, I really appreciate that. And I thank you for doing that. But she said, you do know that you're in that group of pre-existing conditions too. And I said, well, what are you talking about? And she said, well, you've got heart disease. I said, well, I had 2 stents. I took care of it, is what I said to her. And she said, then why do you take all that heart medication? And I said, well, dadgummit, dear, I had this nice little safe bubble of denial that I was living in, and you just blew it up. And so I think that that's a piece that we do sometimes with our grief and with our fear, is that we do go in and we kind of create our own world in that way. And I hear a lot of that going on now of people saying, well, I don't care what the health experts say, those that have studied this for all these years, this is what I believe. And they've begun to create some of their own reality, and it's caused some problems and everything. So I think that's, and I do believe that that's a piece. If you go back to Kubler-Ross's book, that one of the first pieces of grief and loss is denial.
Right.
We're going to do a lot of that stuff. But as I said on this slide, that I think it's important in times of grief and loss to validate our feelings, once again, within ourselves, but also allowing others to do that too. And it's that whole piece of normalizing, that if somebody is feeling fear and scared and sad or whatever that emotion is right now, it's important to say, hey, I think that's pretty normal for the times we're going through. That I think often what we say is that, man, I've never felt this way before. And I think nicely what we say is, have you ever been through a pandemic? And so it's normalizing the feelings. And I think that that's helpful for people. And that's where I do believe that it's really important for us to create community. And I know the way we create community in 6 feet apart and social distancing is different than what it's been in the past. But this tool we use right now, I've just seen over and over how it's created community in congregations. I was talking to a youth worker not long ago, and she told me that she's been continuing her Bible studies with her high school youth and everything, and they do it on Zoom. And they took a couple of weeks off after school was done because most of these kids were Zoom burned out. And now they've started again. But she said what's happening is after the Bible study itself is done, that she's noticing that some of her kids just kind of stay on as everybody else goes off. And so she's learned to engage them in conversation, maybe even play some games with them and get creative, because they're needing community is what they want. I heard of a congregation not long ago, they hadn't opened up again yet. And so they were doing a Bible study at 11 o'clock on Zoom, and they were broadcasting their tape of their other one at 8 and 10 or 8 and 9. And then they were holding a coffee hour on Zoom, that they would open it up and just people could come on while they drank their morning cup of coffee. And this is a smaller congregation, and they got 25 to 30 folks that were coming on. And so it's just being creative in how we create community to help people through those times, I think is important.
Oh, I agree. I think that's, we did a webinar on technology. If you didn't see that one, if you want to learn more, please let us know. But a lot of us have not been embracing technology, not want to do there, as my one pastor friend says, I didn't want to become a televangelist. And but that was his perception of it. But, he realizes this is a great tool, and he's doing stuff very simple, stuff that he's very comfortable with, and it's very effective, and it's really, really reaching people, and his people, and getting beyond that, and like you said, helping with that community, and that connecting is so important. That's been my the church has been scattered in a sense and very isolated. Even as we come back, you got people on all over the spectrum, and like you said, I validate everybody where they're at. If those are people are still not ready, I think it's way understandable.
Right.
Really understandable. And And we just need to, keep ministering to them and not say, hey, you're wrong, get back here, because we can be open.
I had this guy on one of my clergy groups. I do clergy group online once a week, and he came on and he said that he had done the video thing and would try to put it together, and it was really piecemeal, and it didn't always seem to work out real well, and was kind of scratchy and all, and some of his people were having trouble connecting to it and this and that, but before all of this had started, he had taught some of them Zoom, and they had learned from their kids Zoom. And so he said, I think I'm just going to abandon that, and we're just going to go to a Zoom service. And so they would have, all these faces sitting there on the screen, and they would take turns in who's going to be the reader, and they would listen to songs that are played. And he said his people were most people, said, well, that's kind of simple and all, but his people said, this is us, and this really feels good for us, and that's what he's doing, and so it fits for them, and
that's great
to do now. So it's a time, and I think that I remember that city that you live in there, Eric, that I remember flying into there on the 6-month anniversary of Katrina. And I remember sitting down that morning. I think I got in about 7:30, started visiting with people. And I think I'd seen 6 folks in the morning, 6 or 7 folks in the morning. And every single one of them asked me the question, Rick, when are we going to be back to the way it was before? 6 months. And that was their desire at that point. I knew the reality was, I don't think you're ever going to go back to just like it was. But I tell that story that is often where we are when we wander in the wilderness. That's where the people of Israel were. They wanted to go back to Egypt.
Right.
That's where the people of Israel were when Moses went up on the mountain and was gone for 3, 4, 5 weeks, and they thought he was dead. And so they started to create their own reality in creating a God of their own and everything. We get anxious in those times, and we want to do the fight, flight, or freeze thing. And I think those are normal pieces, and we just have to understand what they are. And do trust that we are eventually going to get to a place where it's okay. That's what God has promised us. And look at the top of this slide. I decided to move in this process from my previous slides that say that we've not been here before. I think it's important to understand that we have been here before.
Yeah.
If we would stop and think about times in our lives when a change happened quickly, we lost someone, we lost our job, we lost our future, the community changed, the company changed, whatever. And all of a sudden we were in a place of not knowing how long this was going to be or where it was going to end and what the new was going to be. But as we think about those times that every one of us has been through, we realize that God led us through. And we're new and we're different and we've grown because of those situations. I listened to there's one podcast that a few of them that I listen to now. But a few weeks ago, this one lady on the podcast said, she said, if we really want to get in touch with what we go through in these times, we need to spend time with widows, because widows have experienced a sudden loss and a sudden change, and they have lost control of all that they had, and they have not known what it's going to be like in their new normal, and they have made it through. And I just thought that was an interesting piece for me. So we have been here before, and God has led us through our anxiety before. And the Christ of the cross and the empty tomb continues to stand. I appreciated the reminder that I was given at Easter time that there is that cycle, I think, that life always goes through. And we don't just go through it in March, April. We go through it every day of our lives, as there's a Good Friday followed by Easter. And that happens over and over to us in our world that's filled with weeds. So
that's very good. Hey, I want to give you a chance to clarify a statement, and you can respond to this question that came in. He said, so a leader can identify the anxiety of the system and not internalize it. They then can stay upstairs mentally and present creative anxiety calming solutions.
I don't remember saying that, but I'll run with it for a little bit.
Yeah, well, that's, again, it's what we say and what they hear. So it'll give you a chance to clarify that comment.
Say it again, and I'll stop you where I want to stop you, okay?
Yeah, so a leader can identify the anxiety of a system and not internalize it. They can stay up.
Well, stop right there. I think that I don't know that I cannot internalize it. If I am a part of my system, and if I love the people I serve with, there is part of that does become internalized. And I think that what I said is what I have to do is spend the time not focused on them, but focused on me. Where have I internalized this? Where am I struggling with this? Where am I tempted to react? What do I feel about this situation? And so I can do those things about that. And then what else did I say?
They then can stay upstairs mentally and present creative anxiety calming solutions.
Yeah, I think that when in our prefrontal cortex and our creative, we are led to either of God leading us to see some possibilities through His Word of what we can do, or by our reading or whatever, where we can come up with ideas of ways to cope with this and ways to help those around us or to be part of those solutions. Yeah, that's the way I would more say it now.
Okay.
So I'm sorry if it came across the other way.
It was just a one from somebody listening, so we just wanted to clarify and give you an opportunity to clarify that statement. Because you were covering a lot of good ground, and I know that when I listen to you, I'm thinking, I'm rolling inside trying to apply and look at my own life and look at my own experiences and reflecting on that. And so, it's easy to kind of like, I've been making notes like crazy, so I'm trying not to check out, but I want to go back and kind of like, okay, take that principle and take that idea of identifying that anxiety and take the idea of really identifying that feeling and put a name to it. And not just say it feels different or awkward or stressed. Why?
Well, and as I just said too, that we have been here before, and so sometimes I think what happens to us in our present transitions is that we can pick up on the anxiety that we felt in past transitions.
Yeah, it's good.
And maybe if they didn't get complete, or maybe there was unresolved anger or sadness or disappointment, that we might interject them on this or say, this is just like that. And that there is a piece of all of that we have to, again, go inside and sift through what is today and what is yesterday, and how important that is to do that. Because we are often influenced by our past, and especially our unresolved past. Yeah. I want to say, since this slide is up there, and President Johnson referenced it, yes, your district has a ministerial assistance program, MAP. That's our website, lcsfl.com. If you go on that website right now, there's a whole number of pages of COVID helps and tips and things that we can do, coping skills for kids, for families, for individuals, a lot of videos that we're doing these days and everything. And so you can find those there. Our director is Megan Meisler, and that's her email address. And I serve now as our ministry care coordinator. And that's my email address. And so if there's something we can do to help you, feel free to reach out to us. And that's what we're there for the Southern District.
And as we said in the very beginning, as we were talking, I mean, it's not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength, and I think of courage, and it's just healthy. And, if you can tell, or Rick's demeanor, he's very approachable, easy to talk to, a real grace-filled guy, and it's going to encourage you and listen. And And so I really encourage you, if you have, you just want to talk to someone, you say, well, you know what I'm really feeling, or maybe I'm just unsure about stuff, and I would like to have that clarity and have that connection. I tell you, it's great to have that resource available to our district. And Rick, you've just been a blessing, because you've come from being in ministry. I mean, so you had that perspective too. You've been in those shoes, and now you're in a different position to offer such support and wisdom. So we greatly appreciate how you edify the church, and have been a blessing in the Southern District for so many years. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for this presentation again. And it's really appreciated. It doesn't, I know some of these things I've heard before, and I keep thinking about all the transitions, and you've had us list transitions before, and and just listing them, shows the compound of how many we're going through at one time. I thought that was a really great activity you had us do one time, and it just opened up and say, oh, there's a lot going on, more than I'm even aware of. So that started the process of just kind of slowing down and getting aware of that, and processing that. So. Well, thank you again for joining. And again, this will be the last one for June, and of our webinars that we're offering from the District Admissions Committee. And we invite you, if you want to go deeper, again, in this topic, please get a hold of Rick. That's what he's here for. And then if you want to join into the Leverage Network, where you can get more webinars, equipping webinars each month, and get coaching. I do offer that for others too, but in a network, we have a higher level of training and more intentionality. I know that last webinar, we touched on stewardship a little bit. I've had some great questions and follow-ups with, and I've done some individual coaching to help people to say, how do we do stewardship, and what does stewardship look like in a COVID season? And so we might bring that to a webinar, but if you want to get more stuff, contact me. If you want to get more training on that and support, get into the network so you can become part of that and learn the church systems and learn how you can put those together and then adapt and adjust as the different seasons of ministry come along, and do that with building great relationships, a great community of friends, other pastors who will support you, walk with you, care for you, pray for you, be there. One of the blessings of this network is just the deep relationships and support. And we found out as we got comfortable and trust was built and people were sharing that some people had some similar journeys and some similar things that they went through, and found great encouragement with one another. And so as we talked about that past going with us, and knowing that they weren't alone in that kind of a past, and it's just a big blessing, a great community it's developed. So we encourage you to join in that. If you'd like to learn more, reach out to Daisy or myself, and we will be glad to help you get connected with that. So thanks again. We're going to just close with a prayer, and grateful that you joined us again for this webinar. And so, Lord, we pray for your church. We pray for the workers and lay people, everyone, Lord, who's just going through this journey and all these transitions. And they can get overwhelming and seem so huge and be like a Goliath that's standing over us and has such threats. And but this Goliath we don't see necessarily, and we don't know exactly how it's going to end. And there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of chaos maybe in that. But Lord, you're a God who is not of chaos, but of order, and who has given us certainty in your word and in your Son. And so, Lord, I pray that that certainty that you have provided to us would just take a deeper root in us. Lord, you say if we pray in supplication, and Paul says, man, just to send everything on prayer and supplication, and send it to you, and then we'll have peace. And part of that, Lord, is we got to engage in greater conversations with you for your Spirit to come bring that gift of peace and let it just rest in us. And to reassure us that confidence of the waters of baptism that were poured over us, the Spirit that was given us, the gift of salvation, the gift to be your child is certain and sure. And you are faithful, unmoving, unshakable. And in you is who we put our confidence and hope in. Not us, not our abilities, not our talents, but you. And so, Father, we just thank you. We thank you and praise you for the good you're doing, the good you will do. And I pray, Lord, as this webinar would be just part of a tool that would just help restore that joy and confidence in you in greater measures for our pastors and workers and church, and may go out to all. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks again, Rick and Eric. Appreciate it. Great blessings. Really appreciate all your sharing and what you gave us today. Have a wonderful day. God bless.
Thank you.